Chapter 1. Ensure that you are warm enough. Reflecting on the notion of economy, Henry Thoreau addressed the question of needs. You have probably heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs that explains the needs all people must satisfy and the consequences of doing so. On the first level of the pyramid, American psychologist Abraham Maslow put psychological needs, including nourishment and shelter. Surrounded by nature for so long, Thoreau had a chance to analyze the basic laws of our psychology before Maslow. As a result of his observations, the author noticed that while animals required only shelter and food, human beings needed fuel and clothing on top of that to feel secure. He made a reasonable conclusion that only after a person had satisfied the needs mentioned above would they effectively take care of other issues in life. In Thoreau's philosophy, fuel meant fire, which people used to cook food and heat their shelters. Fire and the clothes they created kept them warm. For animals, food is the only fuel, and it keeps them warm, keeps them alive. In the same way animals strive to sustain their inner fire by eating, people do the same by wearing clothes and heating their food and houses. As such, putting all the puzzle pieces together, we realize that our primary need lies in keeping ourselves warm from the inside and outside. Having this need met, people get the opportunity to develop their inner world. That's what philosophers do. They observe the external, analyze it, try to become better, and convey their knowledge through the text. Thoreau wondered why people stagnate once they obtain a certain amount of wealth. He compared the material world to the soil and a human being to the seed. Soil provides all necessary elements for the seed to grow, but why doesn't the seed rise above the ground? To achieve your goals, you must ensure that you eat and sleep well and have a convenient place to live. Walden, or Life in the Woods, will help you find inner peace and reconsider your relationship with nature. The author showed that humans would feel perfectly happy among animals, plants, and trees. You will understand how important it is to visit the forest, sea, pond, or meadow to establish inner harmony. If you are afraid of solitude, Thoreau's example demonstrates that people are deeper and more interested than they think. Solitude is rather a gift than an issue. Chapter 2. The house can tie a person to one place. The problem of owning a house is that it ties a person to one place. Thoreau thought that when one purchased a property, they didn't become wealthier but poorer. He analyzed how the farmers, their children, and their grandchildren couldn't sell a house and move somewhere else. While civilization has been improving our houses, it has not equally improved the men who are to inhabit them. Henry David Thoreau. People had to work hard to become more noble and wise, and not always the greatest person inhabited the place of the same greatness. For example, a palace is a masterpiece born of a human striving to get warm. While it looks aesthetic and requires a decent person to inhabit it, some kings and queens have hardly been virtuous enough to live in a palace, like Ivan IV, the Terrible, and Mary, Queen of Scots. A logical question arises. Why do people whose intentions aren't distinct from those of the savages in the past millennium deserve better houses than the former? The poor Egyptian slaves had to build the pyramids to make the last shelter for the dead pharaohs, but weren't likely to be properly entombed themselves. In the 19th century, the workers who built the railroads weren't treated much better. People who helped civilization develop lived in miserable conditions, which was far from being just. The civilized man is a more experienced and wiser savage. Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau started to build his house near Walden Pond. He began with cutting down the trees and buying materials, including nails, boards, and windows. He took the stones and sand in the forest. When the author counted how much money he spent on his house, he realized that even a student could afford it. The philosopher made some furniture himself, and some he got for free. He didn't have much of it, just 3 chairs, a bed, a desk, and a table. Thoreau thought that a person who bought a lot of furniture would be poorer than the individual who limited himself to a couple of items. It's like getting caught in a trap and trying to run away, taking the trap along. If one cannot move to another place without being burdened by the amount of furniture they want to take, then there's too much of it. Try to buy bare essentials before you purchase your own house so that you can more easily move from one place to another. Chapter 3. Solitude can help to achieve certain goals faster. Thoreau ensured that a person should choose their own way of living without repeating the fate of someone else. Parents can help their children develop a better understanding of their desires. Frequently, they don't agree with the path a kid chooses for oneself and try to impede the growth of unique individuality. The author thought that an individual shouldn't conform to their friends' expectations. One needs to enjoy life, relying on their genuine craving. What about the companions with whom we can cooperate and overcome challenges together? Two people need to be in the same position if they want to develop together. Thoreau provided a great example of disharmony based on unequal circumstances in which two friends could be put. Imagine that you and your companion travel to a foreign country. One has already collected a needed sum of money and uses it during the journey, while the other has to earn cash to get some food and a bed in a strange land. Let's also assume that the person with the money cannot help the friend because the sum is limited. Most likely, you won't be able to proceed with your adventure because the states of your affairs are too different. The man who goes alone can start today. Henry David Thoreau. If you want to achieve something or go somewhere, you can do it faster alone. Maybe you want to visit a remote place, like Iceland or Greenland, and your friends are not ready to accompany you. If you wait for them, it might take a while before you can travel there, and it's no one's fault. Each person lives at their own pace. The philosopher's life, close to nature, evoked a poetic adoration of the beauty surrounding him. He considered himself living in a distant, almost inacceptable part of the universe, leaving his past as far behind him as the Pleiades, a star cluster, is to the Earth. I have been as sincere a worshipper of Aurora as the Greeks. Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau enjoyed waking up early in the morning and bathing in the pond near his house. He compared this ritual to some religious practices. The Indian king, Ching Thang, covered his bath with an inscription encouraging the day-by-day renewal of oneself for eternity. Thoreau felt like he renewed himself through swimming in the pond. To feel reborn every day, you can create a ritual of purification from the past. Chapter 4. Simplicity is the key to freedom. For Thoreau, the morning was a sacred part of the day. It was a moment when a person started to feel alive after a moment of sleep. He considered that many people underestimate the influence of the morning on the rest of the day, and that we aren't fully awake all the time. We can wake up physically to get engaged in some labor, but we don't awaken our potential for intellectual reflections or poetic life. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Henry David Thoreau. The philosopher wanted to plunge into the core of life and deal with really important matters. Being surrounded by people frequently knocks down our true selves. Only by separating from the crowd can a person start examining oneself. Thoreau wanted to know whether life was mean or glorious in its root, and experience this variety by himself. He appealed for simplicity. Civilized life burdens a person with millions of affairs daily, weekly, and monthly. Thoreau believed that by reducing their number, one would obtain a fuller life, not frittered by some unimportant nuances. Instead of owning 10 cups for your morning coffee, you can have just 1 or 2. The author thought that by living slower, people would feel life to its fullest. Liberation would come to those who cope calmly with the whirlpool of matters required to be done by society. Thoreau was seriously engaged in reading. He believed that true literature, like that written by the Greek philosophers, should be read thoroughly and thoughtfully. People need to learn how to read their whole lives because it's an exercise, much the same as lifting weights in the gym. Reading a book is an intimate process because you spend time alone with your thoughts and feelings of the author. Books have always been valued because people could translate them into different languages and spread precious ideas all over the world. Reading books helps to discover the world and people without leaving the house. Chapter 5. Solitude creates the whole world just for you. Thoreau particularly adored taking care of his small household. He liked to get up early to wash the floors and place all his possessions on the grass in the yard. A minimum number of things he owned standing under the sun and with the trees in the background made him look at them from a different perspective. The unusual circumstances make us see the usual things differently. Although the philosopher lived in the wild, his relationship with it was, from time to time, interrupted by the typical sounds of civilization. He observed that every morning the cars would ride at the same time, and farmers even regulated their day by that sound. The vehicles served as alarm clocks to them. Sometimes the author would get distracted from reading because of the sound of the cattle train accompanied by bleating and mooing of the animals. Another reminder of distant city life was the echo of the bells carried by the wind. It filled each leaf on the trees, and since echo is a natural phenomenon and a reflection of the original sound, it interweaved with the woods and resonated with the environment. Hooting owl induced melancholy in the author. It sounded like mourning with the notes of human voices. But it was a pleasant feeling because owls represented a hidden part of nature, awakened at night and untouched by human intrusion. For the most part, it is as solitary where I live as on the prairies. I have, as it were, my own sun and moon and stars, and a little world all to myself. Henry David Thoreau. No travelers interfered with Thoreau's solitude at night. Only in spring, some fishermen would come to the pond at daylight and leave when darkness approached. At first, he was uncertain about the pleasure of being alone. Just a few weeks after his arrival to the wild, he felt the discomfort of loneliness. But he also knew that this hardship would pass. Finally, he sensed that nature became kindred to him, and he concluded that no place would ever make him feel alone from that moment. His greatest pleasure was admiring the roaring of thunder and the noise of the rain from within the coziness of his house. He believed there was something soothing in rainy weather for the human soul. Chapter 6. Admire the details that fill your life. Thoreau believed that if a person was happy, be it day or night, feeling that their life was blooming like a flower, that was a success. Nature could help one to feel that way. He thought that the most important things in life weren't usually conveyed from one individual to another. Every person can understand it only through experience. According to Thoreau, something indescribable happened inside him that he understood life in a different way. However, nature isn't always about animals and pleasantly smelling plants. When winter comes, one has to take care of the artificial methods of getting warm, since, as the author mentioned earlier, warmth helps people achieve their goals. The philosopher learned masonry to construct a chimney in his house. He was inspired by the steadiness of chimneys because they were autonomous systems. If the house burns down, the chimney won't collapse. A person has to become autonomous to withstand the greatest challenges. In winter, nature is in full swing but more quietly. When Thoreau came to the pond, he compared ice to glass and the pond to the window. In this metaphorical window, he saw the fishes reflecting the weak light. From time to time, he heard his comrade owl howling at night and the honking of the geese that were attracted to the light coming from his house. Heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. Henry David Thoreau. The philosopher had specific admiration of the pond. He heard that locals believed in the bottomlessness of its waters. He was amused by how people didn't even try to check its depth. As the legend went, this pond ended on the other side of the planet. Thoreau decided to investigate this question. With the help of a codline and a stone, as it turned out, the pond had a bottom at precisely 107 feet. Don't always trust what people say. Try to check the information yourself. One more reason why Thoreau wanted to live close to nature was to see the beginning of spring. He aimed to observe how the world woke up after a 3-month sleep. At first, a diversity of birds started to sing in March, even though the ice on the pond remained thick. The warmer it got, the more often he heard how the ice cracked at night. He realized that he couldn't get enough of nature. Conclusion. Attempting to understand life from different perspectives is a good practice. First, you will know yourself better. Second, you will become more realistic about the world. People are often disappointed with reality because they either don't accept it or know all its sides. Living in the city is stressful, especially for the modern generation. Youth can be frustrated by the rapid rhythm and chaosity of everything that happens around them. Luckily, Henry Thoreau conducted an experiment that showed how we could cure our souls of all the noise of civilization. Nature was always the answer. You've probably been face to face with nature, where there's no traffic, only you, maybe some people, and trees or flowers or animals. Remember how you felt at that moment? Most of us will notice how serenity and calmness enter our minds. That's what nature does to people. Often we get distracted by someone's opinions, socially imposed beliefs, advertisements that dictate what we should watch. Such experience is tiresome, while nature ensures that only you matter at the moment. Breathe deeply near the sea or in the forest and feel how all the problems fade away. Thoreau demonstrated that solitude wasn't a scary encounter with oneself. Of course, he had to adapt to life without much company. But what did he get in the end? He was happy. He liked waking up in the morning. Everything around was just for him. Such a connection with nature equals a connection with one's soul, and it's totally worth a try. Try this. Spend some time alone with nature, even if it's the park near your house. Take a notebook and a pen. Turn off the internet on your phone and write your observations or thoughts down. This time is only about you and nature. Find the sound of the sea, forest, or rain on YouTube and turn it on when you feel stressed or need to go to sleep. The sound of rain is especially comforting. Go hiking. It's the best activity in spring, summer, and early autumn. Take your friends and tents and go wild in the wild.